This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And in honor of the Acolyte premiering on June 4th, here is episode 0 of our new Acolyte after show called The Aco-lit Show. The rest of it will be exclusive to Patreon members, but this episode is for everyone. I hope you enjoy. Three days until the Acolyte. I feel like we've been waiting for this show forever. Is it just me?
Yeah.
When was it first announced? I don't even remember.
Was it one of the ominous or infamous Disney investor call day announcements?
I don't think so.
I think
Should I have looked this up before we started recording? Because I don't remember it being part of that.
Let's look it up. I think it was definitely on the, on her big board. But I don't know if it had already been announced and it was just...
Okay. Well, because technically when that happened, the High Republic hadn't started yet. That was December 2020 and the High Republic started releasing in January.
Hold up. We're going to find this right now live. Okay.
If I were better at this, I would have done this beforehand.
Let's see. We're going to go
I would have had like my
Wikipedia.
Info cards. If I was a professional.
Let's
Apparently I'm not.
April 2020, Variety reported that a series was in development with Leslie Headland.
Okay.
The series was officially announced May 4th, 2020.
Okay, so before Disney Investor Day even
Yeah.
happened.
The title, logo, and general premise were revealed at the investor call on December 10th.
Okay, so this was one of those.
Yes.
I mean, to be fair, there were so many announcements, I don't remember.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
So it didn't come out of the ether at that investor call, but that's when we found out that it was the Acolyte.
All right, so 4 years later.
Sounds about right.
4 years later, here we are. Glad to see that another project announced or elaborated upon at that infamous call is finally coming to life.
Yes.
Questionable whether most of that stuff ever will. I'm thinking about Rogue Squadron specifically. It's fine.
Or even if it comes out, whether it will stick around. Looking at you, Willow.
No. Oh, man, I don't even watch that. I didn't even watch that. I know nothing about any of that, and I'm still sad about it. I'm sad on behalf of the people who loved it.
Yeah.
Streaming is in a state right now.
Correct.
But we're so glad that streaming has been kind enough to us to give us more Star Wars. A lot of Star Wars this year so far.
Correct.
On the small screen. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Bad Batch. Tales of the Empire. Acolyte. Is that it?
For this year?
Yeah. Yes.
Skeleton Crew? Question mark. I think that will still come out this year.
Maybe.
Assuming it is coming out.
Assuming it exists.
I still have doubts.
You won't believe it even when we're sitting down and watching the first episode. You won't believe that it's real.
Yeah, probably not.
What will it take for you to say Skeleton Crew is a real Star Wars show that exists?
I think I might have to see the whole thing.
It'll have to be over.
It'll have to be over. I can only say that in retrospect.
And then you'll be like, wow, that was a great show that happened.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone listening to the Acolyte show. Not the Acolyte, the Aco-lit. Who's responsible for coming up with that name? Because it wasn't me.
That would be me.
You've named everything that had to be named in this show.
Yes.
Everything. Now this is lit. The Nameless Show. The On Second Thought series. I think something else. And now this.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a sleeping husky on the floor.
Oh, she's really tired. She wanted to be annoying, but it didn't work out.
She tried really hard. It's been like 2 minutes and she's already over it. So when we were thinking about the Acolyte and how excited we were for it, I remembered that sometimes I like to listen to after shows. There are a lot of content creators out there who will watch a Star Wars thing, and then they'll, after it premieres, they'll talk about it. And I think that's really fun. I think like there is value to sitting with something and gathering your thoughts and then having like deep conversations. But there's also something fun about just reacting to a thing that you just watched, and giving initial thoughts and predicting, and not, just having fun, not too serious conversations about the things that you watched that you liked. And I decided I wanted to do that with the Acolyte. One, because it's somewhat book related. It is High Republic adjacent. We don't know how connected it will be to the books themselves, but we'll talk about that. But it is, book related. We have at least one character that originated from the books that will be in the show. But also, I wanted to give our patrons more things to reward them for supporting the show, because I genuinely appreciate everyone who has supported so far. And hopefully this bonus show, it's a mini series, it'll go for as long as the Acolyte goes, and then if there's more of the Acolyte at some point, we'll do more, and if not, then the show will just be however many episodes it ends up being. And I don't know if you like it, we'll do this for more shows later, but I wanted to give you something nice and fun. And this is episode 0. I'm releasing this to everyone, but the rest of the Acolyte show will be for patrons specifically. If you want to give $1 a month, you can get access to the whole thing. But I figured before that actually starts, before we watch the first 2 episodes of the Acolyte, come back and talk about it, we can kind of do a pre-show, if you will, and talk about our thoughts, what we're excited about, our predictions, ask each other some questions, and this will be kind of just like the Nameless Show, which is also an exclusive show, kind of less structured and more just us talking, because I think that's fun. For those who may have not heard your voice before, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Devore. I talk about Star Wars in a couple different spaces, including this one. This one semi-regularly, others more regularly. Mm-hmm. I'm also your producer, in addition to being a few other things.
Mm-hmm. Embedded into my life as always.
Yes.
So maybe, where do you want to start with this? Because I didn't really come up with a plan.
I didn't either.
What do we know about, just thinking about, what we've heard and trailers, maybe less rumors and more, things we've seen that are official. What do we know so far about the show that we're about to watch?
Yeah, I appreciate you making that distinction because I think that is important. The what we know versus the what we speculate, what we theorize, what has been in the rumor mill.
Yeah.
I mean, what we know is it's a mystery thriller. It's set in the late High Republic. The show's premise centers on, you know, this mystery around someone's killing Jedi, and we have to figure out who it is.
Yeah.
And what's going on. And Vernestra Rowe is in it. And we know, you know, the main cast of characters, roughly.
Yeah.
Or at least the names for a decent chunk of them.
Yeah. And
that's pretty much all we know.
Yeah. And, like, there's nothing wrong with, like, speculation and, like, commenting on rumors and, like, making that part of, like, the excitement. And we'll do, like, some of that throughout this. But, like, I do like to kind of, as much as possible, like, draw that line between, like, this is what we actually know and this is what just random people have said, which there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of fandom is built on speculation and, you know, wanting certain things and hoping for certain things and, you know, pulling things out that we've seen and maybe, like, trying to make connections that we don't know if are actually there or not. That's fun. I think that's an important part of being a Star Wars fan, but, you know, there's that, and then there's drawing from what we know for sure.
One thing I'll say, though, about the Acolyte, and I guess this has been true for Star Wars projects more recently, is that it hasn't been very leaky.
No.
There was a period, remember Mando Season 2? Everything leaked about Mando Season 2.
Yeah, I somehow, like, missed a lot of it, but I do remember that happened.
Everything leaked. Cobb Vanth leaked. Bo leaked. I think Ahsoka leaked. Everything leaked.
Yeah.
I think Luke was the only thing I think that didn't leak.
Yeah,
the only big thing that didn't leak.
Yeah.
But then since then, it's been better. Mando Season 3, Ahsoka, Andor, and now even into Acolyte.
Yeah.
Really, what we know is pretty much a function of what has been officially put out there.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I wonder if that's a function of... I don't want to comment on this too much because I'm not in this crowd and I don't really, you know... I'm not judging and I don't know exactly how it works, but I wonder if that's, like, a matter of, like, being more selective about who gets to see things in advance. You know? I don't know.
It could be.
I don't know. Well, because, like, even those who do get episodes ahead don't see everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's always been the case. I suppose it could be for, like, finales especially. But they'll see, like, the first, like, 3-4 episodes. Sometimes more than that, but, like, that's usually it. Like, they'll see the beginning, and then they're also dip back down with us in terms of, like, we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. You're right, though. There isn't a lot we know. Like, the stuff that we've seen has been the stuff that we've seen.
Yeah.
Like, you have your official stuff, and then you have, like, oh, like, what if this happened? But not that really in between, like, you know, I don't know. It's really interesting. There's also been a lot of promo for the show.
Yes.
More so than, I think, a lot of past shows. I don't know if that's a function of, like, well, because here's the thing about the Acolyte, which I love and also I'm very curious about, is outside of the High Republic being in the books, like, we've been introduced to it before. If you think about, like, the wider audience that may not have read the books and don't know as much about the High Republic, this could be a very interesting entry point for a lot of people. The Acolyte taking place before the Phantom Menace, not needing a lot of prior Star Wars knowledge to understand what's going on, as far as we know. We're just assuming that, I guess. And kind of, in some ways, it's very much like, it reminds me of The Mandalorian first coming out, in the sense that, like, they're trying to, I think they're trying to cater to as wide of an audience as possible, while also making it, like, very Star Wars, is what it seems like to me at the moment, not having seen any of it yet.
Yeah, and I think the Acolyte also is very much a new kind of endeavor for Lucasfilm, because even with The Mandalorian, which starred and then, in terms of its supporting cast, had pretty much all original characters, you were still set in a time period relatively familiar to Star Wars fans, which is the kind of immediate post-Imperial period.
Right.
It's not one that we had really on-screen storytelling with, but you saw the trailers and you see stormtrooper helmets, and you get a lot of the iconography of Star Wars that's there. Versus in the case of the Acolyte, you have, on the one hand, this whole suite of original characters that we don't have any prior connection to, and you also have a time period that a wide swath of Star Wars consumers, don't have much of a connection with, right? Which is the High Republic period. So, to get that kind of general audience investment, buy-in, interest, you might have to plug this a little bit more,
right?
Because that is the target for a lot of these Disney Plus shows, and we'll kind of touch on this. We'll get into this topic, which is about High Republic connections to the High Republic as we know it. The Disney Plus show audiences are very much these kind of wider general audiences,
right.
And so I think maybe that heavier promo that we see relative to maybe prior shows, even prior live action shows, may be a reflection of that. The idea of we really have to get it into the ether that this thing exists and gin up excitement, because you don't have the lines of, oh, here's a show about Obi-Wan Kenobi. I know who Obi-Wan Kenobi is.
Right.
Here's a show about Cassian Andor. Oh, I loved Rogue One. I'll watch that. You don't have that kind of, that kind of shortcut in the brain that you have with a lot of the other projects, or even projects where it's here's season 2 of a thing you've already watched.
Right. Well, in these cases, I think a lot of my dad. My dad loves Star Wars. My dad will watch pretty much any Star Wars thing. My dad has seen a TV spot for the show, and he knows, oh, there's a new Star Wars show coming out. And he might choose to watch it, and he might wait to ask me oh, what do I think? Is it worth watching? I don't know. But someone like him who doesn't follow the books, hasn't seen every show, knows a lot about Star Wars, but may not this is not familiar to him other than the fact that it's Star Wars, there are lightsabers.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's all you need. It's lightsabers, that's Jedi, that's Star Wars. I want to watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's been a lot of promo, and then you had of course you had the premiere, which always happens, but then lots of interviews, lots of I loved the little preview that we got when we saw the Phantom Menace.
Yes.
That made me I was already excited for the Acolyte, but that made me a lot more excited, just seeing a scene that happens in this world,
Right.
It's oh, this is what we're gonna get. This is the kind of and when you do that, you deliberately choose a scene that's this is the feel of the show. This is kind of the style. This is the kind of action you're gonna get. This is what it's gonna feel like. And I think they chose that well. I'm excited.
I agree. It was a really good, a really good tease into the show.
Yeah. Do we want to jump into High Republic connections?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we know that Renestra's gonna be there. We don't know in what capacity though.
Right.
Because we've seen her. But it's is it how how much of her are we gonna get is the question.
Right.
It is gonna be cool to see a book character in the show though.
Agreed.
And so many people love her character. You gotta read A Test of Courage if you've never read The High Republic, because that's where you meet her for the first time. I have been thinking a lot about because we've been talking a lot about how this does have to appeal to a wider audience, because you want people to watch it, of course. But it is still the High Republic, later in the High Republic than the books have taken place so far. So it's in that same era. And the High Republic, like, obviously started with the books and has really developed and become its own thing in the book, on the book side of things. But the question has been, like, how much, if any, like, book material specifically is the show going to rely on? And, like, the thing to remember and the big question mark is, like, the High Republic in the books is technically not over yet.
Yeah.
So you can't do anything in the show that's going to spoil how that ends, which I think is interesting. Star Wars is doing that thing where it's telling stories out of order. And so you're getting the show that happens later in the High Republic when you don't know how the story of the High Republic that we know of so far is coming to an end yet. So, like, there's that gap of, like, oh, now you're seeing things may look a little bit different, but you don't know how they got there exactly. I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I do think that I haven't sat down. I need to actually, like, do the math to figure out what is the time span of difference between where we think Phase 3 is going to end and the Acolyte is.
Right.
Because people have done the math kind of forward of, like, Phantom Menace to Acolyte, but what is Acolyte to High Republic?
Right.
I don't know what that is. I think it's maybe, I want to say maybe a century.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
kind of
give or
the feeling
take.
I get.
It's something
yeah.
like that. So I think it is far enough away that you can do the show and even have some characters from the books, see Vernestra Rowe, without doing much of referencing of the events that happened in the books.
Right.
Because if you figure that, you know, this NTIL storyline that we're getting in these phases,
Right.
let's say we figure it wraps up in some fashion by the end of Phase 3.
Right.
Then you get that, then you get plus 100 years, you know. Right. The galaxy will have evolved and changed enough that, like, you know, in the same way that we're not, you know, in our day-to-day lives we are not, you know, making direct, you know, appeals and callbacks to the, you know, the Balkan Wars in the 19-teens, you know? Right. You can have these events happening and have characters, and they're not like, remember old Martian? Like, that was wild, huh? Those weird dogs, you know, like, all that stuff. Weird dogs. So, like, you're far enough away that I think that cushion will make it such that you can still be in the period that is ostensibly the High Republic, but you're in a different, you know, no pun intended, like, phase here.
Right.
That, like, you have that remove and different things are happening and you have mostly new people and you have a different state of the galaxy and different problems that people are dealing with, such that, you know, having read the High Republic, like, you might get some, you know, greater appreciation, understanding of, like, why Vernestra matters or whatever, like,
right.
But, you know, you don't need to know, like, what her and Imri and Reith were up to like, follow this plot. Right. You know what I mean?
I can't get past the fact that you just made a historical reference in passing and I just pretended to know what you were talking about and then just moved on from it. I do think that's something they could do and probably will do. And this is going to make some people mad, and that's just the reality of what it is. But they will likely, at points, indirectly reference things if they're relevant. Like, okay, because think about the premise of the show is there's this brewing conflict, this mystery, this stuff is going on with the Jedi. I'm not gonna, like, I don't want to get, like, I don't know how much you know if you're listening. Some people don't like to know a lot before going in, but also if you're listening to this, then you're probably not one of those people. Like, in a situation like this, you're gonna look to someone like Vernestra and be like, hey, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
You know, what's your advice? Because at this point, she's a master. She's, you know, a leader in some capacity. She's kind of like, you know, she's someone that they're gonna look to, like, you know, for guidance. You know, there might be a moment where it's like, you know, like, in the past, Jedi have faced, you know, terrible things, and, you know, that, and, like, reference, you know, the Nameless, but not actually reference them for those who don't actually know, because it's irrelevant, but it's not, right? Like, as you were saying, like, these things happened, they're important, but it's so far forward from that it's going to be significant, but not something that they need to like talk about all the time. You know,
a good reference point for where we've seen this already happen is Jedi Survivor.
Yeah.
So if you look at Jedi Survivor, you have a High Republic set B plot, if you will,
Right.
the times when we kind of flash back to what's happening there.
Right.
And you get references to the Nile. You see them mentioned in if you have the subtitles on at one point, you will see reference to Outer Rim Marauders parentheses Nile, even though no character actually says the name.
Right.
You see them overtly referenced. There is allusions to the Great Disaster, because that's how the Shattered Moon is shattered in the game.
Yeah.
Is because of the emergences. And, you know, you get these allusions, and it's also in the Force echoes that he senses. You get the Nile showing up on Tanalorr, and that, you know, that's why the temple is destroyed there and all that stuff.
Right.
But you don't actually need to know any of the game itself gives you everything you need to know to follow. That it's like, oh, okay, the Jedi set up this temple, and then these marauders showed up and then destroyed everything, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know for the basis of the story, and it works. Now, again, if you've read the High Republic books, you can be like, oh yeah, those are the Nile. This is all happening at the same time as the events of Light of the Jedi, or kind of around-ish a Light of the Jedi.
Right.
And yeah, you can say, oh yeah, look at that. The Shattered Moon was shattered by an emergence and all that. And you get that, and it kind of adds that extra flavor, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Here's this sort of like, you can read the books and be like, oh, like this is happening kind of over there, you know, on stage B, you know, as this stuff is happening. Yeah. But if you're just someone who is just, you know, you went from Fallen Order and now you're playing Survivor, and here's, you know, here are these characters and this little kind of side story happening, you know, 200 years earlier or whatever. It's just that.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Exactly. I loved how the game did that, because it was so cool as a High Republic fan to see those elements of it, but also be like, oh, like, you know, I know more context, but you don't need to know more context. So everyone can enjoy it. The High Republic books, from the very beginning, and they've kept this up throughout the whole thing, is they do a very good job of filling you in on things if you don't read everything. So I'm thinking, like, most recently that I noticed was if you didn't read Shadows of Starlight before you read The Eye of Darkness, The Eye of Darkness pretty quickly is like, oh yeah, this happened. And then like, so it tells you what you need to know without having read those things. But if you had read, then you did have a little bit more context, but it didn't make you feel bad for not having done that. And the High Republic has kind of done that throughout, like the book. Like if you don't read the comics, the books do a pretty good job of very quickly summarizing some things that you may have missed out on. And I think the show will have the same feel, where there may be points that if you have explored the High Republic books and other related things, you may have some more context for certain moments or certain ideas. But if you don't, the show is not saying, oh, like, you should have read this. You should know this.
Right.
Because it's not going to do that, because it really can't do that. But what I hope it does do is kind of encourage more people to be like, oh, like, there are books about the High Republic. I don't need to know more, but I would like to explore this further. That's always the hope, is to get people to read books if they want to, but it's not going to force you to.
Yeah.
It really can't do that. It can't afford to do that.
Yeah, and again, we have other templates for this if we look at other characters recently who have gone from print media onto on-screen. So if you look at Cobb Vanth, for example.
Yeah.
Cobb Vanth comes out of the Aftermath books, and you pretty much get a version of his origin story. And, you know, people sort of quibble about, you know, differences and discrepancies between the Cobb Vanth story that you get in the Aftermath interludes versus what Mando Season 2 does in terms of, like, his quote-unquote origin story.
Yeah.
But again, it gives you that origin story, like, oh, okay, like, here's this sheriff guy, and then he finds the armor, and then he comes back and he rescues his town, and you basically, you get a version of that story that you also get in the Aftermath books.
Yeah.
And then similarly with Black Chrysanthemum, in the case of Black Chrysanthemum, he's completely a blank canvas in terms of Book of Boba Fett.
Right.
Like, you don't need anything to be like, oh yeah, the Wookiee bounty hunter from the Vader comics. Like, it references nothing from there and gives you no backstory. But you also don't even need that.
Right.
You just get the context of, oh, okay, he's a Wookiee and he's a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
And then you just go from there and you're fine.
Pretty much. I think Star Wars is really good at this. I think it really is good at inviting you to explore further things that you're curious about, but also being like, hey, if you just want to like vibe with this character and then just keep watching the show and not worry about it, you're good.
I think the one recent counterpoint that I would give to that, and it did like there was a while where it made me wonder about like what direction the Acolyte was going to go into, and I mean like people will debate to what extent this is the case, but I'll just do like this is my like IMO, right? I think is Ahsoka. I think that show is genuinely a case where if you have not watched Clone Wars and Rebels, I think you are fairly confused. Yeah. I don't know that it gives you a lot in the... I think it maybe gives you enough to go A to B to C to D in the plot.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the deeper significances and like what's the... what is it? What do they call them, right? Oh, the so what? Like that.
Oh, yeah.
That you need to have come in with the animated context.
Yeah.
I don't think that the show does not give you that stuff.
Yeah, Ahsoka had its struggles. I love the show, for the record. One of those was that you needed more context than it was going to give you, and yeah, that's an interesting problem that it had.
Yeah. So when that show happened, that was something that when I was kind of looking ahead to thinking about something like the Acolyte, that did kind of give me pause, because I'd been for a while just being like, yeah, the Acolyte's not gonna do explicit High Republic stuff. Then that show happened, and I was like, oh, okay, well maybe, because like here's a live action show that ostensibly is aimed for general audiences, but again is pulling a lot from these kind of more relatively niche materials. So then I was like, okay, might the Acolyte do something similar vis-a-vis the High Republic? And I think in terms of a lot of the, to back to what we were saying at the beginning, in terms of the promo, the interviews, stuff Leslie Headland has said, I've kind of moved back towards, I don't think it's going to do that.
Right. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong about this. Didn't we get a quote from someone or some information at some point telling us that there's a writer on the show that had never seen Star Wars before?
Yes. Yeah, that came out, I think, in one of the maybe Empire magazine came around maybe when we got the second trailer, like the main trailer or whatever.
Yeah,
yes.
I thought so. Because here's the thing about that, and here's why I'm really excited about that, is because I love when Star Wars fans make Star Wars. It's a very magical thing when that happens. But there is something to be said about someone who doesn't have all this prior knowledge coming into it and doesn't feel like this is going to sound... Okay. There's no need to kind of like include certain things in Star Wars stories that you think need to be there because you're a Star Wars fan when really the story isn't served by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like, that doesn't happen all the time. And I'm not saying it's like, that it bothers me all the time. But I think for a show like this, like it's going to be very refreshing to see a story that is set in Star Wars that, follows the general overarching Star Wars formula. There's certain things you have to have in Star Wars to make it Star Wars. But it has the feel of not having to be a certain thing at the same time.
Yeah, I remember when we got that quote and we found that out. Yeah. And I absolutely loved that she did that for this show, because I thought it was such a good recognition of one's own potential, like, myopia as a storyteller, to be like, okay, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, like I love this stuff, and on the one hand that can be good from the standpoint of being in this world and crafting these stories because you have that background knowledge and you have that passion and excitement of it, but also that recognition of like how that could potentially be a liability as a storyteller, of like I can get too much into it and I can craft a thing that people who are at my level will enjoy, but people who aren't, it will just go over their heads and they won't really be invested and take much out of this. So I'm going to put a check in on myself, and I'm going to have somebody on there who's not the kind of fan that I am or engaging with this in the same way that I am, and that person is going to be able to say like, this doesn't really work from this point of view. It might work for you,
Yeah.
but like for this other person is not going to really care about that. And I think that's a really good check in terms of like, are you telling, right? Like, is this a story that packs its own punch?
Right.
Versus like, is this something where you need to have come in with a certain kind of like pretext and knowledge and what have you for this to matter, versus just like the value and the importance emerging organically from the story you're telling.
Exactly. And like, that's such a, I don't know if this is the right word I want to use, but we'll start from here. It's such a mature stance to have.
Yes.
As a creator, to be like, I know a lot about Star Wars, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to make the best show just me.
Yeah.
That is like, and that's not comparing her to any other showrunners who've done Star Wars. Everyone is different. Everyone does their own thing. Everyone has their strengths and their weaker points. But I think it's just so interesting to have someone who's willing to say, like, I'm not going to be the best voice for everything that's going to happen in this show. I think we need more of that.
Yeah.
In Star Wars, I really do. And maybe this will set a precedent for that. Maybe we'll see this show and see what that does. And maybe there can be more of a mix in your writer's room, if you will, where there are people who are more familiar with Star Wars and there are people who aren't. And then knowing Star Wars, being a Star Wars fan is not a prerequisite for creating these things. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
I think
to see overall what the Acolyte does for the future of Star Wars overall.
Yeah, I think I may have said it. I think I've definitely said it in other spaces in talking about the Acolyte, and I think maybe even when we've talked about it, possibly on the main show. I don't know. I think this show is probably the most important show since The Mandalorian in terms of the future of Star Wars TV, because I think how it is received, both critically and also, in general audiences, how it does from just a number standpoint, I think is really going to shape the kinds of stories that we get. Because I mean, it's an unfortunate reality right now of like just how reactionary, studio executives are right now in this environment. And I mean like reactionary in the kind of traditional sense of like reacting to things.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time that we're recording right now, there was on Twitter yesterday, like there was this quote that was going around this big chunk where it was Disney executives talking about like how about wanting to pivot away in their animated movies from like these more like personal stories, like from like an Elemental, like in that stuff, versus like something that has like more mass appeal and such. And that was a reaction to like how those did versus like a Lightyear did, like, and like there's so much. And then even like the reaction to, this is again like kind of contemporary, about like the opening numbers for Mad Max Furiosa and like their reactions to that, about like those opening weekend box office numbers weren't great, and then all of a sudden like there was stuff about like, oh, like our future Mad Max movies in jeopardy now because like one weekend, like the first weekend, it didn't do great. Like, there's such a like reactionary instant like, oh shoot, no, gotta pivot, this didn't work, oh it's not working, we gotta change, there's so much of that reaction of like needing to immediately like retool and respawn and like what works and what doesn't. And I think in a lot of cases, possibly overreacting.
Yeah.
It's like, if this doesn't post the numbers that, whatever C-suite person has in their, like put in their PowerPoint, like if it doesn't hit those numbers, then all of a sudden it's going to be like, can we do this? Can we do that? Maybe we should just stick with like, stick with this, with the safe stuff, like the stuff we know that works, that does numbers. So yeah, I think it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be really important. I've done the comparison in the past with the reaction to Solo and like the fact that movie, again, like underperformed, quote unquote, like that really changed their strategy in terms of like the anthology films. And then a lot of that stuff ended up in Disney Plus and so on. And again, I think a lot of that was sort of unfair to Solo, because I think Solo there were a lot of kind of exogenous around factors that didn't have to do with the movie itself, but had to do with other things in terms of like timing and it being, I think, a victim a little bit of the kind of Last Jedi backlash and all that, but that's like, you know, that's all that.
Right.
But yeah, I think, yeah, if the Acolyte is, you know, a big, huge smash success, you know, it does, you know, it gets, you know, big numbers and it gets high praise, you know, in media and people and all that, like, then I think there will be a greater appetite for and comfort with at the kind of studio level in terms of like, okay, let's do these kind of these projects that are outside the time period, that have these unfamiliar characters, these new characters. You know, we'll bring in creatives who kind of have their own like vision and their own take, and we'll let them kind of do some outside the box stuff. Versus if you have the flip side reaction. I mean, right now the critical reaction seems to be, at least among the people who have seen, you know, the early stuff, the early reaction has been positive. But if you get, you know, wider reception, like once more people have seen it, like if that is maybe middling, or the numbers, you know, again, they don't hit that PowerPoint slide, right? They don't hit those numbers. Then it might be like, let's, you know, like let's make more like Empire versus Rebels stuff. You know, let's stick there. Like let's not, you know, kind of go over there. Like I think you could very much see that kind of stuff depending on how people, right? Like what's the reception here?
Right. Yeah, I mean, at least there are going to be a lot of people who are hate watching it.
Yeah.
Because you know that's what's going to happen. I'm not going to watch this, and then they're going to hate watch it anyway. You know, and that's still engagement.
Exactly.
That's still numbers. So, yeah, I wish that Star Wars and what gets made wasn't so dependent on, you know, business-wise, what's going to do the most, but
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of where we're at with media right now.
Yeah, it really is. There's just it's such an economy of attention, more so than it's ever been. Yeah. Like there's so many platforms, and there's so many things that, you know, you're competing against. Right. Like you're not just competing against other studios and other platforms that are putting out, you know, stuff right now. You're also competing against like every TV show and movie ever made. Right. Right. It's like, do I watch The Acolyte or do I rewatch Lost? Like that's the kind of calculation, right? Like that's what's happening right now. And so in that kind of environment, there is that, even more so, there is that kind of sensitivity to, oh, like the line on the graph went down, like line must go up, you know, so.
Oh, God. You've never played Fetch once in your life, and right now is when you want to play it?
She wants to play with a crab.
No, it's so funny to me where it's like, it doesn't matter what the story is, like, as long as someone sees that it might do numbers.
Yeah. It's the line has to go up on the graph.
I mean, there's a reason we haven't gotten a Star Wars movie in a minute and may not get one for a while yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's not, you can grab it. It's not stuck. Giant baby.
Oh, it's so wild to see it. Almost 70-pound husky try to play with a toy so small. Yeah. Our third co-host is not really sure how she feels about the Acolyte. She thinks Legends is better, and now that I'm saying her opinions for her, and now she's mad at me.
Yeah. Our dog is a toxic Legends fan. In case you didn't know.
Legends is better.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the question that I posed to you when we were talking the other day, which, we can get into how that resulted. So I asked you the other day because I wanted you to remember the question because I knew we were going to come back to it in this recording. And my question for you at the time was, this is what, Wednesday?
Yes.
Earlier this week was, do you think there will be any tie-in books or comics or things like that for the Acolyte? I asked you that thinking it would just be a fun thing to speculate on. Would you like to provide the update that we've since gotten?
Yes. In true us fashion, the following day, we got the announcement that Kevin Scott is writing a one-shot comic based on Kilnaka, the Wookiee Jedi who was appearing in the Acolyte, and that will be coming out in September.
I mean, we had to have seen that coming, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Come on. Really looking forward to that, though. Really looking forward to that. It's going to be good. I mean, despite the fact that we haven't really met the character.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, that there will be more? Like, the tough thing is that, like, we've gotten tie-in comics, so to speak, in a sense, for a lot of the shows. A lot of them have been adaptions of the shows,
Yes.
which I'm not super into personally, but,
Same.
like, I guess, like, do your thing. You remember when Rebels... okay. When Rebels came out, neither of us were watching it at that point, there was so much written tie-in material. Like, I was looking back at all the books that are 10 years old this year. From, like, August to October, do you know how many Rebels-adjacent books came out? Many is the answer. Many of them to coincide with the premiere of the show. I wish they would do that with more shows.
Yeah.
That's just me personally. That's my preference. I like when because, like, the thing about books like that is you don't need them to understand the show, but it just adds more. It's fun.
Yeah.
I would love there to be more, but honestly, there probably isn't going to be because it's not really how they've been doing it with the streaming stuff.
It really hasn't been. You know, we had that Mando book announced, and then that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Bad Batch got what? Like that one Hyperspace Stories comic?
Yeah.
The one shot? Ahsoka didn't get... You're right. They're doing the adaptations, which, like... I don't like asking with Star Wars media. Like, I don't like the question of, like, who asked for this, but then also a little bit like, who asked for this? Yeah. Like, we're getting that for Ahsoka right now. We've gotten it for Mando. Mm-hmm. Andor didn't really have anything.
Kenobi had one of those adaptation things, or has had. It was like an episode-by-episode issue. Like, here's the comic version.
Yeah, so they really haven't been doing that. Yeah. You know, they did a little bit. Vision Season 1 did.
Yeah.
They were all about that Ronin. Like, they were just like, give them a book,
yeah.
give them comics, like everything. And then forgot, like, Vision Season 2, like, I don't know her, you know, like that Mariah meme. So, like, Visions has gotten some things. Like, we've gotten manga adaptations.
Yeah.
So, will they do it for the Acolyte? I mean, we are getting comics, so that's optimistic. You know, that's cause for hope. We got that.
The thing is also, the High Republic exists.
Yes.
So, like, if you're looking for quote-unquote tie-in material to the era, there's, like, over a dozen books.
That's true.
And many more comics. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, they could do more of those one-shots. It's really going to depend on, like, how you could supplement the story.
Yeah.
Which you can't really predict because we haven't seen the show yet.
Right.
Books, definitely not, I don't think. Unless it's specifically High Republic related.
Yeah.
I think what will be interesting, because I've had this theory for a while, which is when the High Republic, quote unquote, ends, there'll still be more High Republic stuff, just not in the way that we're used to. I think, like, once the Acolyte... Okay, we're just going to assume for this that there's one season of the Acolyte and then it's done.
Yeah.
Let's just assume that's the case for now. That could not be the case. The Acolyte's done. The High Republic is done. Maybe then they can get, like, closer into merging, like, those two things in terms of, like, here's a comic, here's a short story, you know, like, maybe they could do more of that. Maybe that's why they haven't said anything about what they're going to do with the High Republic after Phase 3 is over, because they're waiting for the Acolyte. Maybe they're even waiting to see how the Acolyte is received. I don't know. I'm an expert in some of these things, but not really. I can't tell you, like, how some of these decisions are made. I would love there to be more tie-in material, but the reality is, who knows? Other than the one announcement that we've gotten.
Yeah, so the universe of tie-in material for recent projects has not been very robust.
No. Like, remember when they used to do, like video game novelizations? Like, remember those? Those?
Remember when there was supposed to be a comic adaptation of The Rise of Skywalker, and we just never got that.
Oh, yeah.
It just never came out.
I wonder why. I'm kidding. That was a joke.
So, yeah, it's not been, you know, it's not been the direction that they've really wanted to go for, you know, whatever reason.
Well, the fun thing about, you know, the Acolyte not even having started yet is, as we watch the show, as we get to know more characters, as we get more storylines, we can start to say, oh, I would love a story that tells more about this. Or I would love more about this person. I would love to know the backstory of that thing we just saw.
Yeah. And I mean, probably the reason we are getting, at least so far, as the first thing out the gate is the Kalnaka, the one shot, is because he is a convenient character to be a bridge. I mean, it is, even in the announcement, this was billed as a bridge between the High Republic and the Acolyte.
Right.
And he is a convenient vehicle because we know that Wookiees are long-lived.
Yes.
So you can do something that looks back and it's like, oh, maybe here he is as a Padawan, let's say circa end of Phase 3, kind of like that, like High Republic as we know it, and then you can pick up with him in the Acolyte.
Right, exactly.
So he's an easy gateway to kind of start planting some of those seeds. Yeah. So the question will be, do we get that with, let's say, any of the human characters?
Right. Yeah, we'll see. I'm excited to get to know a bunch of new characters.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, loved the Bad Batch, season 3, the ending. I loved, like, the whole thing. But, like, there is that sense of, like, oh, like, we are just not really meeting a ton of new characters at this point. Which is fine, because it's season 3 of a show.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to, like, get a show where, like, oh, like, this person's new, we know nothing about them, they're gonna, like, go through all this stuff, and you're gonna figure out, like, oh, this is now my favorite character, or, ooh, I wonder what this person's hiding. You know, that kind of stuff. And it's also, like, a mystery thriller, which, like, to have that in Star Wars is very exciting in terms of a show, because it's just a little bit of a different vibe, which I love. But it's still Star Wars.
Exactly.
You know? Oh, any other, like, predictions, speculation you have going into this? We're seeing the first 2 episodes this upcoming week, which I don't love multiple episode premieres, but I don't make these decisions. So.
Yeah, I don't think so. I haven't had a whole lot of theories and speculation about the show. I'm eager to just go into it and see what kind of story we get. I'm eager to see what the world looks like, the state of the galaxy. You know, we've seen it a little bit in the previews and trailers and clips in terms of, you know, Coruscant and the temple, and here are the robes that they wear. That's something that I'm definitely looking forward to, is just getting that sort of an aesthetic that feels of the time period, that feels kind of unique to it, in the same way that, you know, you get that with, like, you know, you get that, like, the prequels kind of feel different from the original trilogy, and even the sequel trilogy also feels different than, like, the original trilogy. Like, I want to watch this and feel like, oh, it's like, it's High Republic, it's like that period, but also maybe it's kind of its own, like, maybe it's like, it's late High Republic, and it has kind of that feel, where it's like, it has those things. I mean, we've already seen that in terms of, like, the robes, and there are vectors in there, like, but maybe it's not, it doesn't quite have the exact same feel as, like, 100 years prior, and, you know, like, it feels the same as, like, Phase 1/3.
Like, we're getting closer to the prequels. We're still not quite there yet.
Yeah, I like that. Like, in the same way, I mean, this is, like, you know, over a smaller time period. Like, in the same way that if you look at the prequels, and you go from the aesthetic of the Phantom Menace, and then you go, you know, which feels, like, very distinct, and you have, you know, this sort of, like, Art Deco kind of Mediterranean, you know, you get the sort of inspiration of, like, here's the height of the Republic, and, like, you know, call back to that. And then you get into episode 3, and by the time you get to Revenge of the Sith, you still get kind of its own sort of prequel-y aesthetic, but you start to see, like here's the proto X-Wing, here's the proto TIE fighter, like, you're starting to see those designs, here's the proto Stormtrooper, and, like, that's starting to come through. But again, it's kind of its own thing, and you see it as a sort of, like, transition in between.
Right. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this show. I think the closer we've gotten, the more excited I've gotten. Mostly because there's just been a lot of other Star Wars stuff happening. I just haven't had, like, the headspace to really think about the Acolyte, but now it's, like, Acolyte time.
Yeah.
Of course, June, there's going to be, like, a million other things happening too, but that's okay. Hunters, finally.
Yep, same day.
Yeah, same day. Well, why Star Wars? I don't know. Who knows? It's going to be fun, and I can't wait to, over the next, however many weeks, to come back here after we watch the episodes and kind of just talk about them and, you know, predict and be excited about Star Wars, which is really why we're all here.
Agreed. I'm looking forward to this journey. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, me too. And again, you're hearing this episode because I put it on the feed for everyone. But if you want to continue to listen to us talk about the Acolyte on the Aco-lit, subscribing, joining the Patreon is only $1 a month. And that's, you get everything then. You get a sticker. You get this show. You get the monthly Nameless show, which is where we ask a random number generator to tell us what Star Wars book we're going to talk about. And usually it's a book we haven't read. So that's fun. So yeah, can't wait to have you on the Patreon for that. And as always, thank you for listening, and happy Acolyte Week.
Hey.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Montum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.